Hello everyone, Carl here. Welcome to my video for December 2011. I thought it would be good this month to do a recap. We've been going month to month and the planets have been just forcing us to focus on these individual things, trying to get a grip on them. I thought it would be good to go back over them and just thematically, you understand, not in very great detail, but just to go over the things the planets have been throwing at us. And if we can't exactly define the pattern, we can get a better idea of what the pattern is and kind of reshape our raw material a little bit, start searching for a narrative arc. The last third of the video is actually focused on December 2011. So we get a recap of 2011 focused on Neptune, really. You'll see why as the video proceeds, and a good 10 minutes or more devoted to December proper. So long video, let's just get right to the graphics, okay? A very quick rundown of current astrological conditions, the astrological context. Pluto's in Capricorn, stress testing global societies in every conceivable way. Uranus is in Aries, encouraging revolutionary power struggles. We're seeing a lot of that. Neptune is entering Pisces in February, and I believe that, among other things, will engender intense ideological conflict. And of course, we're beginning to feel the foreshadowings of the 2012 chart, which I believe will be ushering in a revolutionary transformation of global culture and society. Suffice it to say that people and societies are being hit constantly by high-level energies at many levels, from many angles. This has been going on for some years now, and it's going to continue. Not to put too fine a point on it, but things and people, institutions, and so on are really beginning to come apart under the strain. The latest wave of transformative energies to hit us is coming from Neptune's pending entrance into Pisces, and it is this Piscean Neptunian energy that this video is mostly about. The series of charts we're about to review occurred while Neptune 1 moved into Pisces, 2 moved back out of Pisces, and 3 prepared to move back into Pisces. In other words, these charts occurred while Neptune was going back and forth over 0 degrees Pisces. Neptune's flirtation with 0 degrees Pisces has brought a tremendous emphasis on the 8th house. The 8th house is the house of collective wealth and resources and, in essence, delegated power. Power that masses of people delegate to a relatively few people. The 8th house governs the power, the immense buildup of power that flows from the collective wealth and other resources of society. Neptune's ongoing flirtation with 0 degrees Pisces, its home sign, brought us a strong emphasis on spiritual and deep psychological healing and transformation on individual and collective levels, as well as the powerful effects it has had on the money and power issues governed by the 8th house. In other words, Neptune has also affected the 10th and the 4th house, the houses that govern personal and group psychology. These are the houses that directly affect the foundations of power and authority in society. They tie in with 8th house issues very closely. All of this suggests that as Neptune moves toward Pisces and enters Pisces, it will bring about a redistribution of money and power through a reorganization of social, political, and economic systems, and by wreaking profound psychological and spiritual changes among individuals. Summarizing now, all of the beliefs, contracts, compacts, covenants, constitutions, institutions, understandings, etc., etc. All of that stuff, everything that makes society look and act the way it does, will shift, dissolve, evolve, and be otherwise disrupted. So we have Pluto behaving like a wrecking ball or a bulldozer, knocking things down, tearing up the ground, grinding things into bits. Along comes Neptune like a solvent, like the floodwaters, dissolving the chunks left over by Pluto into smaller bits. Okay, so now let's take a look specifically at the chart for April. Just a brief look. Early in April, Neptune dips its toe in Piscean waters. It will stay in Pisces until August. April's chart is dominated by two things. The first is a very powerful T-square that affects the 5th house, the 8th house, and the 11th house. So you have an opposition that puts ego in the 5th house at odds with group interests in the 11th house. Then, with that third point in the T-square, both selfish ego interests and unselfish group interests are at odds with established powers, as represented by the 8th house. So let's summarize here. You have grassroots demands for a better deal for everyone from the 11th house. You have individuals in the 5th house resisting, sacrificing for the greater good. And you have the government forces in the 8th house fighting for the status quo. I mentioned a second important component in the chart. That is the planet Neptune in Pisces in its own sign, all but exactly conjunct the midheaven of the chart. The rigidity, the brittleness, the oppositionality of the T-square is countered by the hyperfluidity of the Neptune placement. Everything in the chart is thereby rendered fluid, fuzzy, and indefinite. Everything is now up for grabs. This foreshadows a complete reshuffling of the social and economic political deck. May's chart hits the 8th house again. Neptune in Pisces is in the 8th house, and as you recall, the 8th house represents that power that emanates from our collective wealth. The 8th house governs the power that flows from our collective wealth, as well as power over our collective wealth, and so on and so forth. Looking at it in more detail, the 8th house also governs taxes, the safety net programs, the social contract. It governs, for example, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, welfare, food stamps, and so on. It also governs insurance, mortgages, investments, retirement generally. The 8th house really governs that huge pile of collective cumulative wealth that sits at the heart of all societies. With Neptune in Pisces in the 8th house, we see yet another suggestion that the social safety net is unraveling before our eyes, under our feet, etc. 3 eclipses in June and July remove all doubt that there is an assault, a planetary assault, on the status quo in the 8th house. 3 eclipses from June 1 through July 1st strike the financial axis of the composite chart for the 3 eclipses. On June 1, there is a solar eclipse in the 8th house. On June 15th, there is a total lunar eclipse in the 2nd house. And there is a 3rd eclipse, a solar eclipse on July 1st, also in the 8th house. So that's 3 eclipses, 2 of them in the 8th house, all 3 of them hitting the financial axis of the chart. These three eclipses further weaken, if any further weakening were needed, the foundations of existing social and economic structures. This weakening will have the effect of further intensifying the ongoing struggle over money and power globally. Early in August, Neptune retrogrades out of Pisces. However, the assault on the power structure continues. Neptune and Chiron at the top of the chart oppose Sun, Mercury, Venus at the bottom of the chart, straddling the vertical axis, the very sensitive vertical axis. The vertical axis of the chart connects the 10th house and the 4th house. Together, these two houses define or govern the two kinds of authority, essentially inward authority and outward authority. Authority from the family, from your psychological history, and so on and so forth. And 10th house authority, authority that derives from institutions, traditions, societal rules and regulations, and so on. In so many words, the vertical axis, the 10th house, 4th house axis, constitutes the axis of authority in a chart, to coin a phrase. This opposition, striking the axis of authority, effectively weakens the sources of authority in personalities, in individual personalities, and in nations. In September, once again, we see intense Neptunian activity along the same axis of authority. Specifically, we see a yod that stimulates the removal of deep mental blocks, that releases tremendous material from the subconscious and the unconscious, and drives a healing and spiritualizing process. In October, we see a sea change. The charts show a shift from dissolution, from a process of dissolution, demolition, etc., to a process of direction finding and self-assertion. In October's chart, we see a yod-like structure, a hard yod, I would refer to it as. This structure motivates people, drives people forcefully, relentlessly, to insert themselves into the political process, to begin to affect the minds of those who hold power, to insert themselves into the discussions taking place among those who hold power. This hard yod points very much to something like the Occupy Wall Street movement, the Occupy movement. And to the best of my recollection, the Occupy movement did in fact emerge on schedule in October. In November, we saw what I referred to as an impaired wealth-building grand trine. This is a structure that gives off wildly mixed economic messages. It is also a structure that, when analyzed, shows that from this point forward, the economic debate is going to include moral issues. Issues of economic fairness come very much to the fore. There is an increasingly widely and firmly held belief that solving economic issues will require also solving issues of economic justice and fair play. Throughout November and December, we saw a series of stationary direct and stationary retrograde planetary activity. As November opened, we had Neptune retrograde, Chiron retrograde, Mercury was direct, Uranus was retrograde, Jupiter was retrograde. In the course of November and December, all of these planets changed direction. On November 9th, Neptune turns direct. On November 10th, Chiron turns direct. Now I want to pause for a moment before I discuss the direction of these last three planets listed on the visual. As I noted last month, retrograde planets come and go. Retrograde start, they stop. We survive them. The point about these retrogrades is that they are occurring against an extremely highly intense energetic background with vast, seemingly violent cross-currents, violent astrological cross-currents. Against a backdrop like that, retrogrades aren't so workaday. They aren't so humdrum or routine. They take on a very special significance, and in many cases, a retrograde or a series of retrogrades will add that one or two straws that's going to break the camel's back. It's more than we need right now to have these planets switching directions on us. Just as a recent example, the stationary direct movement of Neptune and Chiron correlated with 11-11-11. I analyzed that chart last month, and it looks to me like that moment when those two bodies were stationary direct marked a profound spiritual watershed for the entire globe, the consequences of which we have yet really begun to experience. So that adds a little context to this stationary direct, stationary retrograde stuff. With that information in mind, let's now look at what's going on with the movement of these final three planets on our list. On 11/24, Mercury goes stationary retrograde. But this stationary retrograde activity of Mercury, which is highly problematic, takes place 24 hours, just 24 hours before a solar eclipse on 11/25. On 12/09, Uranus turns direct, but it does so while Mercury is still retrograde. Not only that, but it does so only a few hours before an eclipse. That is almost simultaneous with an eclipse. Now take a moment to add into all this all of the factors we've discussed. Pluto in Capricorn, Uranus in Aries, Neptune on the cusp of Pisces, and all of that stuff. To that, add in this weird mix of retrograde, stationary, forward-moving, Mercury, eclipse, Uranus stuff. Try to imagine what a bizarre, mind-bending mix of energies that is, that it represents. But rather than go on dramatically and talk about bizarre, perfect storms of word astrological energies, let me just finesse the problem and say that those 2 weeks between Thanksgiving and the 9th or 10th of December constitute a kind of karmic booby trap. I'm going to err on the side of brevity and understatement and just say that I would be very surprised if those vibes didn't bring us some deeply transformative, disruptively transformative economic and political events. Okay, moving right along here now. Mercury will turn direct on 12/13. You'll notice that I'm not going to stop and make a big deal about the fact that we're going to have a stationary direct Uranus, an eclipse, and a stationary direct Mercury within a few days of each other. No, I'm not going to mention that. I'm just going to move on to the very next thing, which is Jupiter stationary direct on Christmas Day. Very, very nice. Before closing my discussion of these mind-bogglingly complicated planetary energetics, I would like to note that for about a month after Christmas, all the planets will be in direct motion. When you have all the planets in direct motion like this, you're likely to see a brief burst of intense progress along many fronts. But I have to tell you that full forward motion of all planets can bring about unforeseen, unintended consequences, especially in today's astrological context. Now I would like to turn to a discussion of December 2011 proper. This, of course, is the composite chart for December 2011. It combines data for the new and the full moon of December 2011. The first two things you want to notice about this chart are how widely spread the planets are and what they are spread over, the ground that they cover. You'll see that the planets pretty much blanket a certain segment of the chart and leave another small segment completely uncovered. The planets and the aspects pretty much embrace all of the houses in the chart that have to do with our relations with other people. Pretty much all of them, except maybe the third house, but that third house is really kind of liminal. It bridges the personal and the impersonal. We're kind of there personally, but things aren't too personal. They're lighter community involvements. You should also notice that those three empty houses are under tremendous pressure. They're being leveraged by all of the other houses. In a manner of speaking, they're taking the recoil from the activity, the intense activity in all of the other houses. Basically, it means it's going to be difficult for us to maintain our sense of who we are and what we really stand for because of the intense pressure coming from relationship and interrelationship areas and issues. The net effect is that all of our relationships are going to become extremely fluid. We're really talking about the disruption and transformation of all kinds in all kinds of relationships. To coin a phrase or two, we're talking about re-networking, realliancing, realigning to the nth degree. I think we're going to come out of December with very different kinds of relationships and interrelationships than we went into it with. Before moving on, I'd like to refine this picture a little bit and point out that I think that the center of gravity, the focus of these energies, is really the 6th, 7th, and 8th houses. These houses really govern those relationships in which our ties are densest, most incomprehensible and inextricable and unavoidable. We really just are bound up with people in these houses, and there's no real way to escape it, no practical way. So the planets, by focusing all this energy in those areas, is really kind of picking us up by the scruff of our social interpersonal necks and giving us a good shake. But we're not really talking about just a lot of chaotic, frantic, intense activity, some re-entanglements. The planets are offering us direction, very, very clear direction. Specifically, there is a south node which is telling us where we shouldn't be going, and a north node telling us where we should be going. Now, in this context, the south node in the 12th house there is telling us that we should avoid retreating into spirituality. We should avoid obsessing over dogma, ideology, abstract spiritual issues, empty rituals and ceremonies, etc., etc. With the north node in the 6th house, this chart is telling us that we should stay grounded, stay involved, stay connected, stay on our horse. We should actively build productive, mutually beneficial working alliances. We should participate in the re-networking, in the realliancing, in the realignments. With everything that's going on in the heavens these days and in our lives, we're not likely to take any decisions in December very lightly. But this decision is more important even than we might realize. Remember that there is a lunar eclipse in December, and eclipses always punctuate our lives. And this particular eclipse is underlining the importance of a decision that is almost certainly even more important than we probably think it is. Well, I haven't mentioned Neptune in a few minutes here, and you're probably thinking I'd wandered off topic or completely forgotten what this video is about, but I am now about to return to a discussion of Neptune, specifically Neptune's role in the December chart. Now, it turns out that Neptune is involved in a powerful stellium that is very powerfully placed within a couple of degrees of the midheaven of this chart. This stellium, of course, involves the midheaven. It involves Chiron, Vesta, and Neptune. Okay, let's take a closer look at the meaning of this stellium. With Pisces on the midheaven, this chart creates a tendency to get lost in speculation. This dreamy, maybe even lackadaisical, slightly feckless quality will pervade all of our minds and all of our actions and activities in December. Chiron in Pisces brings liberation through illness, injury, spiritual crisis, the experience of universal consciousness. Vesta in Aquarius brings about focus, dedication, and commitment to change through group action for the sake of the group. Neptune in Aquarius, I'm going to say that this brings about a weakening of existing group bonds and affiliations in favor of higher and more spiritual ones. Now, the most important, the most powerful component of this powerfully placed and important aspect is actually the conjunction between Vesta and Neptune. These two bodies are conjunct at 28 degrees Aquarius. The conjunction is exact to within less than half a degree. It is the strongest component in a powerful influence. It colors all the other aspects in the chart, and this Neptune-Vesta influence saturates all motivation, all communication, and all events. It is the underlying vibe in December. In essence, this very important conjunction creates in all of us, or will create in all of us, a strong drive to align ourselves with like-minded people in defense of common interests. Of course, who you line up with will depend an awful lot on how you conceive of common interests. Maybe a simpler way to put it, to net it all out, is that this chart is asking us to pick a side. Okay, now let's tie all of these threads of thought in the December chart into a nice bow. We can do so with reference to the north and south nodes in the chart. If we put this Neptune-Vesta energy into south node pursuits, into dogmatic concerns, into empty rituals and ceremonies, we are most likely going to produce intense divisiveness. It is likely to generate factional and sectarian strife and suspicion, hostility, resentment, and violence generally, the opposite of what you'd think we want. If, on the other hand, you put this Neptune-Vesta energy into 6th house pursuits, into North Node pursuits, you are likely to be able to build those new networks, those new alliances you will need. It will bring you into alignment with like-minded people, people with whom you can work effectively for the good of all concerned. Neptune-Vesta energy, expended along North Node lines, help you create extensive, robust alliances that can weather the transformative process and allow you to participate successfully in that process. All of which brings us back around to the subject of Neptune in Pisces and shows us what a prominent role Neptune is playing at this particular time in our history. I'd like to kind of leave it there, kind of open-ended, kind of a cliffhanger, because at this point, I'm really not sure what kind of experiences Neptune is going to bring our way, and I'd like a little more time to think about it. And that brings us around to the part of my video when I like to discuss the most powerful, the most prominent midpoint contacts that occur in a given chart. And here are my comments on the 4 most powerful midpoint contacts in the December 2011 chart. Our first powerful midpoint is Sun conjoined the midpoint of Pluto and the North Node. This is really a bullying, tyrannical aspect. It will engender an urge to impose our will on others ruthlessly, and vice versa. It's really might makes right, dog eat dog, devil take the hindmost kind of vibe. Not too good, really. The second potent midpoint really kind of counterpoints the first one. It's Mercury conjunct the midpoint of Mars and the midheaven. This one engenders a desire to act deliberately and to lay plans carefully, to carefully lay the groundwork for future successful actions. It also suggests the possibility of stimulating positive news, new jobs, new beginnings. It's a nice midpoint. Our third midpoint picture is also very nice. It's Uranus conjunct the midpoint of Mars and the midheaven. It engenders optimism. It brings about luck in business. It helps us find just the right moment. And it bespeaks sudden success in adjusting in a fortunate way to changed circumstances. That's always good. Our fourth powerful midpoint in December is Neptune conjunct the midpoint of Venus and Uranus. This is a weird one. It suggests unconventional sexual relations, strange flirtations, sudden ends to love relationships. It really suggests a kind of kinkiness. It also leaves us too open to suggestion. Now, I'm going to interpret this liberally and say that maybe what it's really doing is leaving us open to new relationship possibilities that we simply would not have considered before. So, quite a roller coaster ride, huh? Let me emphasize the 2 weeks between Thanksgiving, or let's say Thanksgiving week, and the 2 weeks following it right in December. Look out for them. Be really careful. Those are one weird set of astrological vibes. Boggles my mind just trying to think about them. And I guess we should add the usual expression of concern. Look, guys, we are energy. When you come right down to it, you've seen all the NOVA programs, all these science programs. You know that basically we're just a lot of little bits of energy zinging around. And the planets are throwing energy at us. They're throwing it in variety, in intensity. They're just hitting us with energies we just haven't had to deal with before. And so you've got all this weird alien, disruptive, transformative astrological energy being thrown at us. The stars are doing these energetic acrobatics, and they're bouncing them off us. And, well, let's just say that it's bound to have a disruptive effect on us, on our hearts, our minds, our emotions, our bodies. So do what you can to hold yourself together. Don't get blown apart by all this energy stuff. And we'll see you next time. I'll do what I can to come up with something for January. I will definitely not be doing a 6-month or 12-month ahead in January. I think things are so tense right now, so suspenseful, that it's all we can do to go month to month. And I'm sure that while there's a lot of interest in the year ahead, most people, or a lot of people anyway, will probably want to stay focused on January, what is immediately ahead in detail. Okay, we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.